It is another edition of Crime in the Courtroom. Welcome back, everybody. John Collins here with you. Today is Monday, the 2nd of June, 2025, and today is a coaching session. And I look forward to sharing some thoughts and hopefully provoking some considerations with you about a topic that I believe is going to seriously impact our criminal and civil systems of justice, which is the potential damage that can be caused by subject matter experts whose ability to fabricate or manufacture the appearance of credibility is far greater than their actual expertise. And so my comments today will focus on the integrity of experts and expert witnesses in a time, excuse me, when we've become so dependent on them. And our dependence on them not always results in proper or comprehensive scrutiny of them. So our priority today is to create the conditions in which liars and charlatans are unable to adversely impact our justice system while making sure that we derive the most value out of those experts that actually are very good and very worthy and deserving of our trust. So I'm looking forward to exploring this very important subject with you. Before we get into that, I want to recognize and thank our season sponsor, ProMega, host of the International Symposium on Human Identification, the largest conference in existence dedicated to the practice, challenges, and opportunities of forensic DNA testing. For over 45 years, ProMega has been helping scientists find the answer, going beyond a focus on products. At ProMega, we bring a network of diverse ideas and solutions to drive better results, not only for our criminal justice system, but to protect and preserve our quality of life through the practice of life science. Promega is the team that turns questions into discoveries. Learn more at promega.com. And for more information about our upcoming symposium later this year, please visit ishinews.com. That's ishinews.com. And one quick housekeeping item I want to share with you. I want to give a quick shout out to one of our former guests and a good friend of ours, Caitlin Burchell with NBC Connecticut, who joined me not too long ago. We found out recently that Caitlin was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards for her work at NBC Connecticut. So I just wanted to send out my congratulations to Caitlin for that much-deserved recognition, and we'll keep you posted on the results of that. Going back to our subject for today, and that is the integrity of subject matter expertise, the integrity of subject matter knowledge and skills and abilities, with an emphasis on how it impacts our criminal justice system. As many of you know, I teach a workshop called Advanced Expert Witnessing, and we do it online, but I also do it quite often, in fact, more so these days, live. So I'll go out to different venues, usually forensic science laboratories or police departments, and we spend 2 days together talking about the deeper nuances of the art of serving as an expert witness in the criminal justice system. And one of the videos that I show in the class is a video of Sheriff Grady Judd of Polk County, Florida. And in this press conference, and I'm a big fan of Sheriff Judd, and I would love to try to get him on the podcast so that you can experience him and learn from him, because I think he's, as best I can tell, he's a pretty outstanding and very passionate and very expressive law enforcement officer. And so I appreciate him a lot. But some time ago, he executed a press conference in which he announced that an arrest had been made of an individual who was presenting entirely fabricated, fraudulent sets of credentials and using those to testify in criminal cases in Polk County. And it was discovered that this particular quote unquote expert witness was completely fraudulent. And by the way, the extent to which this guy was going to paint himself as a credible expert was so over the top that when you looked at his resume or you looked at his CV, which I have not done, but I assume just based on the press conference with Sheriff Judd, that you would wonder if this guy was telling the truth. He reportedly was making claims that at one time he worked on the space station. He was claiming he had degrees that he didn't have, security certifications that he didn't have. And Sheriff Judd at one point made mention of the fact that during during what I presume was some kind of questioning of this individual, they were asking him specifically about one of his certifications. And his response to the question was, well, in my mind's eye, I have it. Now, now think about that. This is a guy that is testifying in criminal cases where the outcome of that case potentially is the result of the defendant being deprived of his or her freedom. And this so-called expert witness is presenting his credentials. And he is fabricating most of them, certainly the ones that are, I would say, the most impressive. And then he's telling the police that, well, in my mind's eye, I have it. And as the sheriff mentions in this press conference, and he does a great job of pointing out, how serious this is, that is not an expert witness. That is not an individual that has integrity. That is not an individual that is a serious player or should be a serious player in our criminal justice system. No way. In my mind's eye, I have this credential. That's kind of like saying, well, I can only bench press 100 pounds, but in my mind's eye, I can bench press 400. I've often said in the workshops that I teach, and I've mentioned it before on this show, that the criminal justice system and the pursuit of public safety is serious business for serious people that have serious credentials. And we seem to be living in a time where integrity has gone out of style, uh, perhaps in the minds of certain individuals. And I fear that this is the case in the minds of many young people that are coming out of college today, which we'll get to in just a second. I had a I had a an upsetting experience that happened to me back when I was working as a crime laboratory director, and I interviewed a young man fresh out of college who was interviewing for a latent fingerprint examiner position. And he went through our interview process or our application process, and my application processes were usually a little bit involved. I'm a big fan of essay questions, and so he went through the whole process, and he did a really nice job. He answered the questions well. He had an impressive resume. He checked all the boxes, met the credentials that we needed for the position, and so we did a telephone interview with him, which was sort of my standard practice. And then once we realized that he was on our short list, then we wanted to meet him in person. So we brought him in to the laboratory, sat down with him, and I invited some folks from different parts of the laboratory to participate. So obviously we had our latent print supervisor there. But I also brought in people from other parts of the lab just to get a kind of a fuller perspective on the individuals that we were conducting these on-site interviews with. And we really liked this young man. He was very energetic. He seemed to have a really nice way about him. He struck me as an individual that would be fun to work with. And so we took some time to think about it and offered him the job. So a short time later, one of my scientists who participated in the panel discussion took it upon herself, and I have to admit, it wasn't me that asked her to do it, but she took it upon herself to look at his credentials and look at his resume and look at his class list and some other things that we had asked, for from him. And she had a concern. There was something about his resume and something about his curriculum vitae that just sort of bothered her. And so she did a deeper dive and she started to notice some, what she thought might be some inconsistencies between his educational credentials, meaning his degree, and the classes that he took, because we asked for a class list of collegiate courses taken during undergraduate studies. So she made a phone call to the university and found that the classes that he took, that he had lied on his resume, and that the classes that he said that he took, he did not take. And so this was brought to my attention, and I kind of sat in my office and I was really, really disappointed and I was angry. But I sort of felt like we owed it to him to defend himself if there was a misunderstanding. And so I called him up and I said, hey, look, I need to ask you a question. I said, we were just going through your credentials and your class list. And he interrupted me and he said, I withdraw my name, and he hung up. That was a very disturbing experience because of how close we came to bringing an individual onto our team in an internationally accredited forensic science laboratory that sends its employees to testify in criminal cases. But how close we came to bringing him on board. And I wish I could tell you that it was me being the wonderful director that I supposedly was, or thought that I was. I had nothing to do with checking to make sure that he was telling the truth. This was one of my employees that took it upon herself. And my goodness, was that a learning experience for me. And it was very, very alarming. Now, the individual that we ended up hiring for this position turned out to be fantastic. But there are individuals out there that take a skewed or have a skewed understanding of what it means to have integrity. What I mean by that is there are individuals out there that really believe that I can say or do whatever I want. It's up to you to figure out whether or not I'm telling you the truth or not. And if you can't figure that out, then that's your problem. And this is the attitude that many people have today. This is the attitude that I think an increasing number of young people have today. Yes, I think that social media has something to do with this because there's so much BS on social media and people sort of become enamored with these quote unquote influencers, right? It's all about influencing. It's not about telling the truth. It's not about accepting responsibility for being honest and being transparent and understanding that that is something that all of us have to do for this world that we live in, this society that's depending upon us. It's really scary what's happening. And in my travels and in, when we talk about this in our workshops or when I do coaching sessions with people that work in the criminal justice system, it's very alarming to realize how common this is and what a serious problem it is and how pervasive it is. It's going on all over the place. A colleague of mine, who is a professor at a university in Pennsylvania, well, I'll tell you, Pam Marshall with Duquesne University, very good friend of mine and somebody who I think very highly of. And she has been a guest on our program. She reached out to me recently and brought to my attention an article that was published in New York Magazine. And the title of the article is Everyone is Cheating Their Way Through College. And it's an article about how students are exploiting the power of artificial intelligence in order to make their way through college and to write papers, especially. And it is it was written by a professor who became alarmed by a project that one of his students was working on. And it's a really good article. I'm going to include a link to the article. Now, if you click the link, it's possible because you're not a subscriber that you won't be able to see it, but you may be able to kind of make out some of the a little bit of the content there. And if you're so inclined, I think you can do like a free trial, and you can view the article. So I would encourage you to do that. And I'd like to read to you an excerpt from this article. Quote, massive numbers of students are going to emerge from university with degrees and into the workforce who are essentially illiterate, both in the literal sense and in the sense of being historically illiterate and having no knowledge of their own culture, much less anyone else's. And so the concern is that because of artificial intelligence, the incentive to think critically and to make learning a thinking endeavor is going to very slowly erode the credibility of the individuals that are coming out of universities or entering into certain professional fields that require high levels of expertise. And so this becomes more problematic when we expand outward away from academia and we go into, for example, the criminal justice system, where our criminal justice system relies heavily on individuals with specialized knowledge and skill who can testify as expert witnesses and therefore allow our entire systems of justice, that being, criminal and civil, to be able to function. Because in the absence of those expert witnesses that we can trust and that are truly experts, and they are credible, they're professional, and they are consummate in the way that they present themselves, in the absence of those individuals, we just cannot have a reliable criminal justice system, which means our criminal justice system relies on integrity. And without that, as Sheriff Grady Judd pointed out from Polk County, then we were screwed. And so integrity, in my view, and I would love to get your comments on this, so please email me at john@criticalvictories.com. Um, we need to prioritize integrity. We need to be teaching it. We need to be reinforcing it. We need to be explaining to young people in particular why it's in their best interest to have integrity. One of the challenges that we run into right now in the criminal justice system with expert witnesses, but it certainly is a bigger problem than just the criminal justice system. This exists all over the place in consulting and things of that sort, is that freelancers, individuals in private practice, to be candid, like people like me, we have tools available that allow us to manufacture or fabricate the appearance of being knowledgeable, the appearance of being credible, the appearance of being trustworthy or deserving of professional respect. And certainly artificial intelligence, things like ChatGPT, can go a long way to helping people project what appears to be independent critical thought. You can use ChatGPT to write really elaborate articles and blogs that you don't have to have a lot of skill for. It does take a little bit of knowledge and skill to prompt these artificial intelligence engines the right way. But if you're not an individual that's very smart, or you're not an individual that knows how to write, these artificial intelligence engines can do it for you. So there's AI. We have Photoshop for creating images, and you can create artificial intelligence generated images that look very real, and so you can use these in your marketing materials and on your websites. You can, as I said, you can write blogs and articles. You can do podcasts like this one. You can appear on podcast interviews and so forth, and you can issue, opinions and put those out through social media. So there's so many ways that you can access an audience and project the appearance of credibility and high levels of expertise and so forth in ways that you never really could before. So what I would describe these times that we're living in right now, I would sort of describe them as an experts market. If you think about, for example, the housing market, and they talk about having, it's a buyer's market or it's a seller's market. Right now, we live in an expert market, and what that means is people are of the mindset that I can say whatever the hell I want to, and I can write whatever the hell I want to, and I can create whatever video I want, and it's up to you as my audience to figure out for yourself whether or not I have integrity or whether or not I'm being honest or what I'm saying is truthful or accurate or useful or material to whatever problems that you're trying to solve. And it's kind of a way of saying, you know what, screw you. And it's definitely based on entitlement. I am entitled to be an influencer just like all of these other people that I see on my social media channels. I want to be an influencer too. And I'm entitled to that. And so you're going to listen to me, and it's up to you to figure out if I know what I'm talking about. That is not good. And I believe in a lot of ways that's where we're at right now. And so that puts the recipients or the users of individual expertise, the people that rely on experts to their potential detriment. It puts them in a very difficult situation. One of my frustrations, and I know that there's a lot of individuals that listen to this podcast or watch it on YouTube that work in government agencies. And I've had this conversation with a number of individuals, and it continues to be a very, very serious problem. And this is what I would describe as a dysfunctional HR approach to selecting and hiring job candidates for positions that require higher levels of expertise, such as forensic scientists in forensic science laboratories or that are working in law enforcement agencies somewhere. What happens in government is that government is often overrun by individuals that do not allow managers to make more thoughtful decisions on who they hire. And one of the ways that this problem manifests itself is, for example, I might be the director of a forensic science laboratory. And as in the analogy or the story that I told you earlier, I might be hiring, let's say, a DNA analyst, right? And so I have to go through the interview process. And what happens is that I am allowed very little or no latitude in asking the kinds of questions or getting to know the job candidate in my own way through conversation and asking questions so that I can have a higher level of confidence that if I offer this person the job, that I'm getting a person that can meet the essential functions of the position, is going to be able to represent my organization, and chances are I'm not going to have a problem with this individual later on down the road. I'm not going to find out that they lied on their resume. I'm not going to find out that that there's just something about their personality or something about their background that's causing a problem and making it difficult for them to do the job the way that we need it to done, the way that we need it done. So instead, what happens is that you have these extremely strict civil service or HR requirements. And it gets to the point, and I've seen this and I've experienced it, where as a hiring manager or as a team that is going through the hiring process, you have to follow a strict set of questions. You have to read them right off the sheet. You can't expand on anything. You can't say to the candidate, that's a really interesting thing that you just brought up. Tell me a little bit more about that. You know, uh, and what happens is it becomes this really rigid, almost inhumane exercise that not only impacts the ability of the hiring manager to have some level of confidence in the quality of the individual that they may be bringing on board, but it also erodes the confidence that the job candidate has in the organization. Because there's nothing worse than sitting through an interview where, as the candidate, you don't feel like you can really gauge who these people really are because it is so scripted. And so, for those of you that work in these civil service divisions or you work in HR, if you are perpetuating this problem, you are really potentially causing a lot of damage to our public institutions. And if it's in the criminal justice system, especially, you know, where I come from in the forensic sciences, you're you are tying the hands of these laboratory administrators who are trying to bring people on board that can be good team members, that can be enjoyable to work with, that can be trusted. And so I have a huge problem with the way that a lot of government agencies do their hiring. There's no thoughtfulness to it. And you cannot, in this day and age, you cannot screen people the way that you need to screen them by having a very rigid process that basically prohibits thought. So to the extent that, we see problems that occur in government agencies, or we see an issue, and this has happened recently, issues with, forensic scientists, one of the first things that I want to look at is their hiring process. How did you screen these individuals? So we live in an era where we have to work harder than we've ever had to work before to evaluate the expertise and the credibility and the integrity of the individuals that we are bringing into our criminal justice system in whatever capacity that they're working in. And I would like to encourage everybody that's listening to this or watching it to think to yourself, what are some things that I can do that are within my power to improve our ability organizationally to evaluate our job candidates better so that if we make that hire, we can have a higher level of confidence that we made a good selection. And part of this is going to be to really, really focus on that resume, on that CV. In your application documents, you may require candidates, this is an option, require candidates to provide contact information of individuals at their university that can be contacted to confirm the accuracy of the academic credentials that are being reported. This is so important, and it's going to continue to become more important as we move into the future. So, given given the state of affairs right now, we might ask ourselves, okay, well, what is it that we can do? How bad is this problem? And what can we do to mitigate the risk that arises because of these problems? I mentioned on a podcast episode some time ago that, and as I just mentioned a few moments ago, that I am a big fan of essay questions in interviews or as part of an application process, because what it does is it allows you to get a feel for what the person thinks about things. And it also tests their ability to communicate as much as possible in an economical way, which requires good critical thinking skills. So one of the questions that I received from a listener was a very good one, and that is, well, how do you do that now in the age of artificial intelligence? If you tell a person, okay, we'd like you to, as a condition of the application, if you are going to apply for this job, we want you to answer these 5 essay questions, and you have to answer them in 150 words or less, which is a wonderful exercise to force somebody to do, and it's a great way to evaluate an individual and their thinking skills and their communication skills. But if you're dealing with artificial intelligence or in the era of artificial intelligence, then how do you overcome that process? Because it would seem, or how do you overcome that challenge? Because it would seem that the presence of artificial intelligence now compromises the validity of the essay questions themselves, and that is true. So what I would say is one way is you can force the individual or compel the individual to sign a certification that the questions were answered without any assistance from artificial intelligence. That's only going to have so much value because there are people out there that are more than happy to lie in that regard because people want jobs. The other is, and I like this option, is to bring people on site once you realize that this is a person that you would really like to get to know. Bring them on site and spend a day with them. Don't just make it a thing where they show up and they're there for an hour or an hour and a half. Spend some time with them and give them, let them sit down at a computer that has no internet connection. They have no access to artificial intelligence, and you have them answer these 5 essay questions. They have to answer each in 150 words or less. And I think that that's a fantastic way to evaluate somebody. Another thing that I would mention, and I think that this will apply to our professors in our universities, and I think will apply to any professional occupation or responsibility where we have to evaluate people and we have to be mindful and alert to their level of knowledge, their skills, their expertise, and so forth. And perhaps I would go so far as to say that this may be where artificial intelligence has an unexpected or unintended benefit for all of us. Because what I think all of these different tools that we have access to is going to, like AI and Photoshop, all these different things, is it's going to focus us or force us to go back to our roots in some ways, our human roots, which is to say that we are going to have to start doing what we have gotten away from, which is engaging in the good old-fashioned conversation. Because in a conversation, you cannot hide. You can't hide in a conversation. You can't check or type in something in Chat GPT, in a face-to-face conversation with somebody in a meeting room or over lunch or over dinner or something like that. And what's going to happen, I really do believe this, that conversation skills and socialization skills and maximizing those as much as possible is going to be the antidote to the artificiality that exists in society and in our search for good employees. We can overcome that through conversation. And so we're going to have to get good at conversation again. And I run into this a lot in my coaching practice. Many of us out there, and I think that there's a lot of reasons for this. It's not because people are bad people, but the times have changed and the times have sharpened some of our senses and the times have dulled some of our senses. And our social skills and our conversational skills, I do believe, among many individuals, have become dulled. And I think that this is especially problematic in technical fields, scientists, engineers, architects, IT, things of that sort. So we, I was a track and field athlete in college, and one of the things that we used to sort of say to ourselves when we were competing or before a competition or after a competition is that, track and field is one of those sports where you can't hide behind your fellow athletes that you're competing with like you can in football or basketball. You can have a bad day in football or basketball or soccer or a team sport, and you can sort of hide behind the support that you get from your team members. And so you can have a bad day and still win the game, or you might not, and nobody would really realize that you had a bad day. Or hockey's like this too. But in track and field, or in gymnastics, those kinds of sports, individual sports, you cannot hide. It's apparent and plain for everybody to see whether or not you have your A game on that particular day. And only you as the athlete are responsible. You have only yourself to blame, and you have only yourself to give credit to. And I think the same thing holds true in conversation. So we've talked about two solutions here. You can't hide in a conversation, and you can't hide when you're answering an essay question on a computer that isn't connected to the internet, where you can't do a Google search. You can't ask ChatGPT to write you a paragraph. And so we are going to be getting back to our roots. We're going to have to, because if we don't, we are not going to be able to competently evaluate the expertise of the people that we are going to be placing our trust in very, very high stakes situations. I think the implications of this, for example, in medicine and as patients, who might be dealing with a difficult condition that's affecting our quality of life or even our duration of life. And we are constantly having to put our trust in people, in doctors and nurses and other kinds of practitioners, when we don't really know how to evaluate whether or not they know what the heck they're talking about. And so, again, we are entering an era in which our capacity and our ability to evaluate expertise, subject matter skills, abilities, and things of that sort are critically important. They've never been more important than they are now, because there are so many opportunities, or I should say, there are so many tools out there that people can use to portray themselves fictitiously so as having a lot of expertise and having a lot of credibility. So I want to close this with a thought related to our criminal justice system and the testimony that is provided by expert witnesses. According to the Federal Rules of Evidence in 1975, and certainly the Daubert ruling in 1993, our court, the Supreme Court, made it very clear that the judge in each individual criminal proceeding is the gatekeeper. And by gatekeeper, what the court meant was the judge is responsible for determining what evidence will be heard or seen by the trier of fact, which is the jury. And so it has to get past the gatekeeper if it's going to be admissible at trial. But the challenge that judges are like everybody else. They're, like the attorneys and the expert witnesses themselves. Judges are very busy and they have a lot going on. And they don't necessarily have the time or the energy or the resources or the tools to evaluate the the honesty, the disposition, the temperament, the expertise of witnesses that are going to be testifying in court. So I can't help but wonder, and I would love to get folks' thoughts on this if you have any ideas where this may trend. Is could we find ourselves in a position here someday when we have to establish some some type of useful constructive registration or certification system where our courts maintain a registry of expert witnesses that they deem to be credible in certain areas of expertise, or the courts actually certify expert witnesses where they have to be certified before they come and they testify in court. There's a lot of legal and judicial nuances with that, because we're dealing with the criminal justice system, and we have the potential, if we don't do it carefully, we have the potential to encroach on the due process rights of defendants that are entitled to their day in court. So the times have changed. The problems are real. The problems are significant. It has never been easier to be a charlatan It's never been easier to lie about your credentials. It's never been easier to make yourself look like you're much smarter and more capable than you actually are. And unfortunately, it is human nature to take advantage of those kinds of things. So there will be individuals out there that lack integrity. They might be full-blown sociopaths. They might be psychopaths who are willing to exploit those tools, exploit those advantages in order to make a living and to enjoy the power and the feeling of status that comes from testifying as an expert witness in court. And that means that our courts and our court officers, the prosecutors, our defenders are going to have to really up their game in the coming years. I have to do it right now, to make sure that when we bring expert witnesses to testify and give their opinions in courts of law, that we have done our due diligence to make sure that these are individuals are they're credible, they have the right temperament, they have integrity, and they're not going to lie, and that they do in fact have the expertise that they need to help the court resolve whatever dispute is before it, because that is the role of the expert witness in the American criminal justice system, and it is a very, very important role, and we cannot dismiss our responsibilities to make sure that these individuals, when they testify, that they are not going to cause more harm than good. It's a worthwhile subject, and I have a feeling that we're going to be talking about it again in the future. So thanks again for joining me, everyone, for another edition of Crime in the Courtroom. I'm John Collins, and we will see you next time. Take care.